Welcome to Inside World Report. I'm Christine Williams. Coming up for discussion, the Quebec elections, the gunfire that followed, and also highlights of the Democratic National Convention like the economy, race issues, and Jerusalem. Joining me in the studio, Robert Metz, president of the Freedom Party of Ontario, and Dr. George Breckenridge, a political scientist from McMaster University specializing in American politics. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Well, George, you also specialize in all kinds of politics. Speaking of, our first story is going to be Canada-based, and that's fair enough.
I love politics of any kind. So.
Oh, you sure do. Now we're looking at what happened in Canada this week, and that was big, and that's the Quebec elections. Quite the drama there. Pauline Marois, she won, of course, the first female premier in the province. Now, she's a strong separatist. Sadly enough, though, following that win, shortly after, during her victory speech, she was dragged off the stage by her bodyguards because of a shooting that took place. It left one person dead and another person in critical condition and a third person that had to be treated for shock. Indeed, a tragedy that, of course, nobody expected. And we're going to be talking more about what the mandate is of that party. But before we go on to talk about that and to talk to our guests about what their feedback is, I want you to have a look at the clip of Marois. She addressed what happened during that shooting. Now take a look at that.
I was on the stage, and my garde du corps took me off. I asked questions. I saw a man which has some problem, but it doesn't seem major. I saw fire, but they closed the door, and everything was under control by the police of Montreal and by the firemen. So I asked to my bodyguard to be back on the stage because I was afraid about the crowd. We were so many in the meeting, and we asked them to go outside, but I asked them to go outside slowly, to don't be nervous, there is no major problem, but I didn't know at this moment there was a man which has been killed. So that was my reaction and what I saw yesterday night.
And a 62-year-old was charged in connection with that. And on the heels of that, something else took place that nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody expected, but Jean Charest, leader of that party for 9 years, and in politics for some 28 years, he made the announcement of his resignation. Take a look at that clip.
It's been a real privilege for me to serve the people of Sherbrooke, to serve the people of Quebec, and to serve the people of Canada. We are all blessed to have been born in this country, to share its wealth, and we're blessed to have each other.
Now, to introduce some of the discussion about what we'll be talking about now concerning Marois, she's known as a staunch separatist, saying things like, if the occasion, the climate came up tomorrow, she will separate. And she also indicated that that's going to be one of the mandates of the party, that they'd like to see Quebec as an independent entity unto itself. So the question is, what about the third of Quebecers that support separation, the rest don't? I mean, that's a pretty drastic... you're shaking your head there. I'm going to start right with you there.
She only got about 31% of the vote. This is, you know, and this is not really a victory for separatism at all. All the polls show that there's very little interest in having another referendum at this time. Now, I mean, nationalism in the nature of things is never going to completely go away in Quebec because of the distinct culture and language and that sort of thing. But it's not a political issue at the minute at all.
I don't know that 31% is necessarily an indication of great support or lack of support, because really very few, even majority parties, get much more than that in a given election. So how you can measure that is a whole other issue. I think basically voters want a single thing from their government. They want their benefits, they want their goodies. And in Quebec there's a little bit of extra. They want, maybe some of them want separation or that distinct identity that they've always been talking about. And that's been an issue with Canada as long as I've lived in this country, all my 60 years of life.
Yeah,
so
she's not going to be with a minority like she's got. She's not going to be able to do anything about it.
She's not going to be able to do it, but I'd like to hear, Dr. Breckenridge, what your view is, because you said about not being a victory for separatists. No. Do you see it as not a victory because you don't believe that that could possibly happen given the small number of people that do support separatism? Or are you referring to it as a blanket statement?
No,
with
it's
the
not
Parti
going to,
Québécois?
certainly not going to happen now. The interest in Quebec in separating has really gone down. And a lot of people think it's actually a generational thing, that Pauline Marois' generation and the older people were the really separatist generation. The younger people seem to be less interested in that. And so, as I say, so there's really no great momentum about it. Now, she'll be under pressure within her own party, because the whole point of the party, the whole distinctive thing, which makes them different from the Liberals or the
Yes.
NDP, is the separatist
Do you
thing.
find that troubling?
Well, it's the nature of that kind of party, but the question is whether they can ever really do anything about it.
Yes. What about
And
you,
of course,
Robert?
if they were to hold a referendum and lose again,
Yes.
you know, the more often they lose, the more the thing becomes dead. So
Do you find
she's not going to risk anything
do you find
like
it
that.
troubling that, again, this is a fact that we're left with here, that the leader of the party, the Parti Québécois is a separatist party, and that is the leading party in Quebec. Do you find it troubling that they are more concerned about their own identity in Quebec than they are about the rest of Canada? I mean, she's been very clear that this is what she wants,
Yes,
and if she could do
she
it tomorrow,
has,
she'll
but-
do it. Do you find it troubling?
It's troubling in some respects, but again, you know, I recall the first time a separatist party was elected with René Lévesque. I was in the banking industry then, and that was the day, the first time, that the Canadian dollar fell under the American dollar and stayed there almost permanently, with very few changes until recently. And it may affect it again that way. Quebec is under a terrible debt situation. They're just got their debt cranked up to the limit. There's no place to move. So majority or minority government, I think she's not going to be in any different position.
Now this is if I dare say so, is a bit of a sore spot with me personally. I'd like to hear what your feedback is. Okay, Quebec is known to be the beneficiary of the biggest of the transfer payments, and in fact, they're the only province in the history of Canada that hasn't even had to declare itself as a have-not province. So, in one way, they're so reliant on Ottawa,
Well,
and then it's like saying, well, I'm so reliant on you, I need you, but go away. I want to be my own separate
The danger in
country,
Quebec,
so
the
to
other
speak.
danger in Quebec is, as you were talking about the state of the economy, the other danger is the more nationalist you become, the more barriers you put up to people within Quebec and to immigrants coming in, the further behind you're going to fall. I mean, that's the problem. And so the kind of thing she was proposing to do, which she now won't be able to do because she doesn't have a majority, are really unhelpful in terms of economic development and in bringing in the kind of immigrants that they need.
What do you think of her immediate decision to announce an order in council that will actually revoke the tuition hike for the students?
Well, I mean, she
What
promised
do you
to
think
do
of that?
that. It was
Right.
an obvious
That
thing
was
to
for
do
sure
in the circumstances. You know,
You agree with that?
Certainly, yes. From her point of view, I agree with it, of course, because now she can say that she followed through on her promises.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what about the repeal of Bill 78 to control some of these protests? I mean, that
well,
came in, of course.
That's a good
Do you think it was a
idea.
good
The
move?
bill went too far, I think. It went too far and created a kind of a backlash that that Charest didn't anticipate. So
Yes.
I think that's inevitable as well.
But given the, if you look at the pandemonium that those protests created, do you not think that there might have been some validity to that bill, even though it might have gone too far, as you say?
I looked into the protests. I listened to some of
Yes.
the protesters talking, and it wasn't all about the education issue. It was it was a bigger picture, and they kept trying to stress that. We want to talk about a bigger picture, and their bigger picture, of course, was a larger socialist government, and that's what they're really after. And they have said so explicitly. So that's really what it's all about. Most of that motion that's taking place in the student activity is being actually directed very
There's a root
critically
to that, you're saying.
by Socialist International and other groups who are involved, and has already been revealed. So, to get that many people protesting for that long over a tuition fee, it just doesn't
They
sound
tried in
natural.
Ontario, actually, and
They
that
were
kind of
also
fizzled.
That didn't work here.
They were
didn't work
also
here, no.
protesting the way it was being handled. It was very badly handled by Charest.
Do you see some kind of a link to the whole socialist movement there?
No, not really. I mean, whenever you get something like that, you get socialists and people like that jumping on the bandwagon, trying to make something more of it. But I think it was perfectly straightforward. The students don't want to pay any more fee.
I think the joke is that we already have socialism in Quebec and in most places,
Well, social
and it's
democracy,
running
yeah.
its normal course of bankruptcy, and now the students are starting to learn the effects of that, but they're teaching that the cause of the problem is capitalism. and that you should be anti-capitalistic. That's all part of the mantra, right? And so they're running to the very problem that they tell us they're trying to solve, but that's not really what's going on at all.
It remains to be seen what's going to happen now that Jean Charest has resigned, because according to reports at this point, there's just nobody in sight who could possibly replace him.
Well, I mean,
do you have any projections?
That often is the case, but somebody is going to replace him. And they're going to have to move fast, because whenever you've got a minority government like this, it's a setup for another election fairly quickly, usually.
It's more of a vacuum than a,
exactly.
Positive push, yeah.
Yeah, it sure is. Well, we're actually going to move on now, because the second issue that we're discussing, I mean, that is a big one. It's not, again, to do with Canada. It's what's happening in the States, the Democratic National Convention just coming to an end, but so did the Republican. And it now marks quite a significant point in time, because both candidates now have finished officially declaring that they're running. So we're going to be talking about the ins and outs of that after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Inside World Report. I'm Christine Williams. Well, Obama officially accepted his nomination last night at the close of the Democratic National Convention. And his speech focused on his upbringing, how he scraped to make life work. And the message was that America can be a place, too, where it's opportunity for all. But here's a little bit of what he spoke about.
We believe the little girl who's offered an escape from poverty by a great teacher or a grant for college could become the next Steve Jobs, or the scientist who cures cancer, or the President of the United States. And it is in our power to give her that chance.
What's very interesting about this campaign, too, between Romney and Obama are the powers of the whys. Now, Michelle Obama holds a lot, but so does Ann Romney. Now, we're going to be talking about the whys, what they had to say, what their positions were based on, of course, the campaign itself. But before we move on, here's a look at Michelle Obama and what she had to say.
Well, today, after so many struggles and triumphs and moments that have tested my husband in ways I never could have imagined, I have seen firsthand that being president doesn't change who you are. No, it reveals who you are.
You know, sometimes you hear about the campaign platforms of various parties, and you wonder, well, what's the platform? This one is quite amusing. It's pretty clear, cut and dry what both platforms are. Now, here's some of the problems you face here. Okay, you've got Obama that's campaigning on, we're for the poor. We're the answer for the poor. We're the answer for the middle class. Here's Obama. He had to scrape his way to go ahead, and that makes him more understanding when it comes to the poor of the nation. Because right now, after all, the economy is so bad. But at the same time, you look on the other hand, and you look at Romney. He's being painted to be a man that's rich, and he just can't identify with the middle class and the poor. But at the same time, he's also deemed a man that maybe knows better how to handle money. So you've got both sides trying to deal with a very bad economy right now, both politicking on different sides. But you also have the other issue of Obamacare. That's being seen as trampling religious rights and freedoms, forcing religious institutions to pay for abortion. And of course, the Republicans are looking at that as, hey, what are you doing here? You're being anti-God here. Another thing that came up, or anti-religious institution, another thing that came up, and this was quite big, and this put a little bit of a stain, as far as I'm concerned, on the Democratic National Convention. It made papers everywhere, and it caused quite the disturbance among the Democrats themselves. And that was a decision that was actually made on the campaigning on the floor that was adopted, and that had to do with reinstating the word God and reinstating the notion of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. At the start, it was removed, then they decided to put it back. Years ago, it was there, so it was on, off again, now back on again. So they found themselves in a position where Obama had intervened and said, look, we want it back in now. So the way the policy is, they have to get 2/3 of the delegates to vote on it. So it's like a nay or yay, and then came, well, the cheering. So if you're for it, let's hear it. If you're against it, let's hear it. Now, to anybody who was listening, it was pretty clear it was half-half, but still, it was voted through, and they declared it's going to be an official policy. So some Democrats, their nose is at a joint. They're saying, you didn't take us into consideration at all, and it's causing a stir. Take it away, folks.
Well, that's the way a good chairman handles a situation like that. I mean, you know, what are you going to do? Take an actual vote? I mean, that would completely mess up their situation. I mean, Obama simply told them to put these things back the way they always had been.
Talk about last
They're
minute,
symbolic.
though.
They're
Talk
simply
about last minute.
they're symbolic issues, and apparently they only noticed that they'd been taken out or they had been missed out or something like that. I think they're small symbolic issues. It doesn't really matter very much.
I think it could be more than symbolic. It could have something to do with fundraising and finding out, because Obama has somewhat alienated the Jewish community to a large degree and is no longer getting the Jewish money that apparently he needs to win his campaign with. So I think there's a lot of maneuvering going around in that level. On the larger picture, you know, all of this, the wives talking and talking about the characters of their husbands and things like this is all very well and interesting, but I think it really reveals the superficiality of the whole process, doesn't it?
They're character witnesses of their spouses, and both of them spoke extremely well. I mean, Anne Romney did too. She talked about the soft-hearted side of Romney because he's been presented as the rich guy with no heart, but he doesn't parade it according to what she's saying because he does it in private. So it was quite interesting with these two.
All of the rhetoric. I mean, the people were kind of speeched out. I mean, if you listen to both campaigns, the Democrats have the better speakers on the whole than the Republicans do. But it's a very American style of rhetoric. We don't.
Do you find that? Do you find that they have better speakers?
Well, they just did. I mean, they just did.
How could you beat Clint Eastwood?
Well, nobody can beat that. Yeah, nobody. But that wasn't. That wasn't planned. That wasn't in the plan. Yeah. It's an American style of political rhetoric that we don't see. We just don't get that sort of thing.
No,
and
we
it's
don't
all
get that
about,
much
you know, America, what a wonderful country it is, and how exceptional it is, and how it's still #1. And then all about, you know, the candidate, how wonderful they are. And of course, in this particular case, you do have a contrast between Romney, who is, you know, born rich and made himself very much richer, and Obama, who really did work his way up. You know, so the Democrats were all emphasizing the struggle to get up because they want to appeal to particularly the area where the Democrats are weakest at the minute is among older white voters.
Yes.
Who way back used to be traditional Democrats, but aren't anymore for a variety of reasons. And that's the area where they're weakest, and that's why for example, Bill Clinton was there.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because the race issue, you can't hide from that race issue in America right now.
No, it's there.
There's the Jewish vote, there's the Latino vote, there's the black vote. And according to all statistics, Romney's pretty far down when it comes to the black vote. And the Latino vote, same thing. But he managed to pick up a few points, apparently. At least that's the projection with the Florida representative, who is Latino and apparently seen as somebody that's really going to be pulling up
He's got
that
a long
state
way to go on that.
his behalf.
The
But
Republicans
it's a huge issue.
can only win by maximizing the white vote. That's simply the situation they're in. And whether they can pull it off for one more election, it seems to me doubtful, but we'll see.
But it's sad that it ends up like this. I mean, Obama, proponents of Obama has put it, oh, it's the first black president, it's a wonderful thing, we have to continue this. Yes, it's great that there's a black president, but at the same time, we have to put ourselves aside, no matter how we see things, and try to look at the value of what that person espouses. But the race card is definitely a part of this.
It's understandable the black community would be solidly behind the first
Although
black
they're not
president.
solidly, I'll have to say, because a lot of the black ministers have come out, and they're angry at Obama with this situation with Obamacare and funding the institutions
Yeah, but
for
you're going to see a
abortion.
very solid black vote. But the Republicans have actually alienated the Latino vote by their policies on immigration. You know, it's not that they have not been sympathetic to the interests of the Latino community. That's why they're so far behind.
Robert, yes, go ahead, Robert.
I think the fact that we're even talking about black, Latino, and everything just tells you how fragmented American society has become, and it's group against group. One group trying to get benefits from the other.
Well, we're not even far behind in this country. I
No,
mean,
we're
there's
the
always
same way. I think the person that came closest to trying to identify some issues in this was actually Clinton at the convention, when he said, if you want to winner take all, you're on your own society, you should support the Republican ticket, he says. If you want a country of shared prosperity and shared responsibility, a we're all in this together society, you should vote for Barack Obama.
Yeah, that's the contrast the Democrats are trying to make,
Now, the funny thing is, I don't see the two parties as being different on those grounds, because they're both, they are both the same
No,
on
they
those
are,
grounds.
they are.
Now, I have to ask you this, Robert, because you are a die-hard capitalist.
Yes, I am.
The general impression that you get coming from the Democrats, and especially, in fact, from Michelle Obama's speech, and if you disagree with me, George, please interject, was that look, Obama is a guy that he's been there, he's done that. That's why he's the better man. Romney, he was born with a gold spoon in his mouth, so he can't possibly identify with the hard-working American.
Yeah.
You agree with that?
There's some truth to that. I think that, you know, people have been actually saying that Romney's more of a capitalist, and that's why he should be in there. But he's more of a fiscal capitalist, not a philosophical capitalist, as I am. And I don't think that is necessarily what you really want in terms of picking one thing out of a leader and picking him over that. I think you want a president who sees the bigger picture. Yes. Not just all the little pictures and trying to play one against the other. That's what I think leadership is about. And if you take the bigger picture, and to me the biggest picture is always individual freedom, it's the only thing that benefits everyone equally, that is a sign of leadership.
That is a big one, the individual freedom, and there's so much more to talk about when it comes to that, but unfortunately we only have a half an hour, so we're going to have to go for a break. We'll be back after this, don't go away. Welcome back to Inside World Report. We're into the wrap segment of our program now, and sometimes I get to ask a question, sometimes I don't, but it's the portion where our guests say what's on their mind for the show and they didn't get to. Let's start with you. Okay, George, go ahead first.
Well, I think Romney's handicap is not only that, you know, he's not, his kind of privileged upbringing and the kind of narrow segment of the market he's been involved in, but I think his other handicap is his party. And I was very struck by the way in which a lot of Canadian conservatives are keeping their distance from the kind of extremism in the Republican Party. So Margaret Wenting, the conservative columnist in the Globe and Mail, called Romney a decent man kidnapped by a bunch of lunatics. And I think that's pretty close to it. The Republican Party has swung so far to the right, particularly on social issues, that it's a real handicap for Romney. You know, he's sort of stuck in these positions or identified with these positions, which I suspect are probably not his own positions.
Robert?
I'm amazed to hear anyone say that they've swung so far to the right. I wouldn't consider them far right. But it's interesting to hear Ryan say that, you know, the Romney path should be a better path rather than the lesser of two evils. That's a very you know, noble sentiment. But here again, if I look at the complete debates that I see going on, the big issues aren't being discussed. It's all about personality, superficial issues. Like, what about that war over there? What about all those issues that are the big issues that are draining the American...
Quick comment about foreign affairs policy that you see?
Oh, the Americans have gotten themselves in a huge mess. They committed themselves to a war, and now they're trying to get out of it. And I never saw that as a short-term thing. If they were going to go into Iraq in the first place, they should have stayed there, or never gone at all.
Yeah, but I mean, Obama's, to his credit, got them, you know, ended the war in Iraq, took the Americans out, and has a you know, timetable for getting out of Afghanistan.
Obama took a pretty strong hand, though, when it came to radicalism, when it came to bin Laden. So that's something that actually could be applauded. I mean, he did what was needed from that perspective. But you know what? That's a whole show by itself.
You can also say it was a continuation of what was going on before, just as were the deficits that he took over from the previous governments. They're all on the same page. They're all moving in the same direction.
Well, we'll continue our conversation after the show. That's all the time we have now. See you again next time. I'm Christine Williams. Thank you for watching.